My name is Anna Williams, 67 years old, and until that moment, I thought I was just a proud mother preparing for my only son James's wedding at the Fairmont Hotel in Boston. Then I heard it. My future daughter-in-law Sophie whispering into her phone in the bridal suite, "I will get a divorce as soon as the inheritance is in my name." His mother has no idea. My heart stopped. The family fortune my late husband built from nothing was the target. My son had no idea who he was marrying. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe to hear how I turned the tables on a gold digger who picked the wrong family to mess with. To understand how we arrived at this moment, you need to know a bit about my family. My husband David and I were married for 40 years before he passed away from heart failure 5 years ago. David was brilliant, hardworking, and kind. He started from humble beginnings, the son of immigrants, and built Williams Technology Solutions into a company worth millions. We were comfortable but never flashy with our wealth. David believed in working hard, living modestly, and giving generously. When David passed, he left a careful inheritance structure designed to protect what he had built. Most of the assets remained in a family trust, with distributions planned at certain milestones. James would receive a substantial portion when he turned 35, which was just a year after his wedding date. The rest would transfer gradually over time. David was always thoughtful that way, wanting to ensure our son would have financial security but not receive everything at once before he was ready. Our son James is brilliant like his father. He got his engineering degree from MIT and now develops innovative, sustainable energy solutions. While James inherited his father's intelligence and work ethic, he unfortunately did not inherit his father's perception about people. James always sees the best in everyone, which makes him an incredible human being, but sometimes vulnerable to those with less honorable intentions. After David died, I focused on managing our family investments and supporting James in his career. I never imagined I would be raising our son alone, but life had other plans. I threw myself into philanthropic work, establishing the Williams Foundation in David's memory to fund educational opportunities for underprivileged students. This work gave me purpose during my grief. James met Sophie 18 months before their wedding. He brought her to Sunday dinner, and I remember thinking she was beautiful and poised. With her perfectly styled blonde hair designer dress that somehow looked effortless and charming smile, she captivated the room. She laughed at all the right moments and asked thoughtful questions about our family. James looked at her like she hung the moon, and I was happy for him. After losing his father, he deserved some joy. Their courtship was quick. After only 6 months of dating, James proposed. When he told me, I expressed concern about the timeline, suggesting they might want to date longer before making such a commitment. But James was certain. "When you know," he said, echoing words his father had once said about me. How could I argue with that? I gave James his grandmother's ring to propose with. It was a beautiful 3-carat diamond in a platinum Art Deco setting that had been in our family for generations. When Sophie first saw it, there was a fleeting moment where disappointment crossed her face. It was so quick I almost missed it. Later, she said she loved its vintage charm, but wondered if they might have it reset in a more modern style. James looked crushed, and she quickly backtracked, saying it was perfect as is. That was the first tiny red flag. I tried getting to know Sophie better, inviting her to lunch or shopping, but she was always busy with her job as an event coordinator at a luxury hotel. The few times we managed to meet without James, she was polite but distant. When James was present, she was warm and engaging, touching his arm affectionately and asking about his day. When we were alone, her smile never quite reached her eyes. James had dated several nice women over the years, but no relationship had progressed to engagement. I wanted to be supportive of his choice, even as my maternal instincts whispered caution. I reminded myself that David and I had also had a relatively short courtship and that had worked out wonderfully. Was I just being an overprotective mother struggling to let go of my only child? About 4 months before the wedding, we had a family dinner at my home. Sophie asked unusually specific questions about our family business and the inheritance structure. "I just want to understand the family I'm marrying into," she explained smoothly, when I showed surprise at her interest in these details. James proudly explained his future inheritance. mentioning the significant distribution he would receive after his 35th birthday. Sophie listened intently, nodding along. Looking back now, I should have recognized the calculating look in her eyes for what it was. That night after they left, I sat in David's study where I still felt closest to him. "What do you think of her, David?" I asked the empty room. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the uneasiness I felt. But what could I do? James was an adult, making his own choices. I decided to keep my concerns to myself unless I found concrete reasons to voice them. Little did I know those reasons would soon present themselves in the most devastating way. As wedding preparations accelerated, Sophie took complete control of the planning. She insisted on the most expensive venue in Boston, selected a designer dress that cost more than my first house, and chose elaborate floral arrangements that would be flown in from international growers. When I suggested something more reasonable, she countered that James had assured her money was no object for their special day. James, who had always been frugal like his father, suddenly seemed unconcerned with expenses when it came to Sophie. "I want her to have the wedding of her dreams, Mom," he said when I expressed surprise at some of the costs. "Dad left us well provided for, and he would want us to celebrate properly." What troubled me most was Sophie's intense interest in financial matters. During a meeting with our family attorney to discuss the prenuptial agreement, Sophie asked detailed questions about what assets would be considered marital property after the wedding. Our attorney, Franklin Bennett, had been with our family for 30 years and gave me a concerned look during this conversation. Later, he pulled me aside. "Anna, in my experience, most young people entering marriage out of love are uncomfortable discussing prenups at all." Sophie's questions were unusually sophisticated. One afternoon about 3 months before the wedding, Sophie and I had a confrontation over the wedding budget that revealed glimpses of her true nature. I had questioned a $75,000 expenditure for a custom ice sculpture and champagne fountain. "James and I have discussed all the expenses," Sophie said dismissively. "I understand that, but as trustee of the family funds, I need to approve expenditures over $50,000, I explained. For a moment, her perfectly composed face slipped, showing irritation. "This is James's money too, not just yours to control," she snapped. Seeing my shocked expression, she quickly softened. "I'm sorry, Anna. Wedding stress is getting to me. Of course we can find something more reasonable." That evening, I made a decision I never thought I would make. I contacted a private investigator recommended by Franklin. I felt terrible invading Sophie's privacy, but something wasn't adding up. 2 weeks later, he delivered his findings. Sophie Daniels had been engaged twice before, both times to wealthy men significantly older than her. Both engagements ended mysteriously, just before the weddings. She had changed her name from Sofia Demidova 10 years ago, upon arriving in the United States from Russia. The investigator had also discovered Sophie maintained an expensive apartment in Back Bay that she had never mentioned to James. He believed she stayed there at least 2 nights a week, despite telling James she was working late or visiting a sick friend. None of this was conclusive evidence of ill intent, but it deepened my concerns. One day, while Sophie was showering at my house after a pool day, her phone repeatedly buzzed with notifications. I am not proud of what I did next, but maternal instinct overrode my usual respect for boundaries. I glanced at her phone screen and saw multiple messages from someone saved as T, with references to the plan and patients. Before I could see more, the shower turned off and I quickly moved away. What disturbed me most was how Sophie was gradually isolating James from me and his longtime friends. She would make subtle comments. "Your mother seems so stressed lately, maybe we should give her space. Or don't you think Ryan just wants to relive college days rather than grow up like you have?" One by one, James's regular interactions with loved ones diminished. When I tried to discuss my concerns with James, he became defensive. "Mom, I know you're having trouble letting go, but Sophie is going to be my wife. You need to accept that our relationship is changing." His words stung because they contained a grain of truth. I was struggling to let go, but not for the reasons he thought. As the wedding date approached, tensions between Sophie and me increased, though we maintained a cordial facade. I met again with Franklin to discuss how we might protect James's inheritance more securely. "The trust already has some protections," Franklin advised, "but We could add additional clauses regarding the timing of distributions. We made some adjustments that would delay certain asset transfers until after the 10-year anniversary of marriage, though James would still receive his scheduled distribution at 35. 2 weeks before the wedding, I spotted Sophie at a cafe downtown with a tall, dark-haired man I had never seen before. They were sitting close, speaking intensely. When the man reached out to touch her hand, she didn't pull away. I was too far away to intervene or overhear, but I took photos with my phone, my hand shaking with anger and worry. When Sophie noticed me approaching, she immediately stood up, greeting me with false brightness. "Anna, what a coincidence. This is Thomas, my wedding planner's assistant. We were just going over some last-minute details." The man nodded politely, but something in his eyes made me uneasy. He excused himself quickly. "I thought Marianne was handling everything I said," referring to the primary wedding planner. "She is, but Thomas helps with vendor coordination," Sophie replied smoothly. "Shall we have coffee together? I was just finishing up." I joined her, pretending to believe her explanation, but my suspicions had reached a breaking point. Who was this man, really? And what was Sophie planning? With the wedding just days away, I felt time running out to protect my son from what I increasingly feared was a terrible mistake. The day before the wedding arrived with perfect early summer weather. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled at the Atlantic Harbor restaurant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. Everything was immaculate, from the white orchid centerpieces to the custom menu featuring James and Sophie's favorite dishes. Looking around at the 60 guests mingling and laughing, no one would have suspected the storm brewing beneath the surface. After the dinner and toasts, I excused myself to bring a forgotten gift bag to Sophie's bridal suite. The hotel had given them a lavish corner suite as a courtesy due to Sophie's connections in the hospitality industry. I knocked softly, but there was no answer. I used the spare keycard Sophie had given me for emergencies, intending to leave the gift and go. As I entered, I heard Sophie's voice coming from the bathroom, sharp and clear through the partially open door. She was on the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. I froze, not meaning to eavesdrop, but unable to announce my presence once I heard my son's name. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned," Sophie was saying. "The old lady suspects nothing. Yes, tomorrow I become Mrs. Williams, and in exactly 1 year, James gets his big inheritance payment. The lawyers confirmed it's $7.5 million. My blood ran cold as I stood motionless, gift bag dangling from numb fingers. The prenup is annoying but unavoidable given the family money. It only becomes problematic if I leave before the 5-year mark. But our timeline works perfectly. I marry James tomorrow, play the devoted wife for 12 to 15 months, while the inheritance transfers, then file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Of course, I've been laying the groundwork. I've already started occasional fights about his mother's interference and his workaholic tendencies. By next year, our marriage problems will be well established. With the right lawyer, I should walk away with at least half the liquid assets, more than enough for us to start our life together." Sophie laughed softly at something the other person said. "Don't worry about James. He's so blindly in love, he doesn't see anything except what I want him to see. And no, he has absolutely no idea about us. He thinks you're just my friend from college when he's seen us together." My mind flashed to the man from the cafe. Thomas. Not a wedding planner's assistant, but Sophie's real partner in this elaborate con. "I know it's been hard waiting, baby, but tomorrow is the last hurdle. 1 year of playing house with James, and then we're free. The inheritance will be in my name too, and his mother can't do anything about it." I must have made a sound because Sophie suddenly went silent. "I have to go. I'll call you tomorrow after the ceremony." I heard water running, giving me just enough time to retreat to the hallway. I pulled the door closed quietly and leaned against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. For several minutes I couldn't move. The devastating reality of what I'd heard paralyzed me. My worst fears weren't just confirmed, they were exceeded. Sophie wasn't just marrying James for money, she was executing a meticulously planned long con with a partner targeting our family specifically for the inheritance. My first instinct was to run to James's room and tell him everything. But would he believe me? Sophie had spent months subtly undermining my relationship with my son, painting me as controlling and resistant to their relationship. Without proof, it would be my word against hers. And even with proof, the humiliation and heartbreak this would cause James on the eve of his wedding was unimaginable. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think like David would. Strategic, not reactive. I needed evidence no one could dispute. I needed to protect both my son and our family legacy. And perhaps most importantly, I needed to ensure Sophie and her accomplice faced consequences for their scheme. I pulled out my phone and called the private investigator Harold Kent. Despite the late hour, he answered immediately. "Harold, it's Anna Williams. I need your help urgently. Can you meet me in 30 minutes at the hotel bar?" After hearing my brief explanation, he agreed. Next, I called Franklin Bennett. "Franklin, I apologize for the late hour, but there's been a development you need to know about." I gave him a condensed version of what I'd overheard. "This is extremely serious," Anna Franklin said gravely. "If what you heard is accurate, this constitutes fraud and potential conspiracy. What do you want to do?" "I don't want to stop the wedding," I said, surprising myself with the words. "Not yet. I need irrefutable evidence first, and I need to protect the assets while appearing to transfer them according to the current plan." "You're thinking of setting a trap," Franklin said. Not as a question, but in understanding. "Exactly," I replied. "Can you meet me first thing tomorrow morning, say 6 a.m. at your office?" "I'll be there," he promised. When I met Harold at the bar, he was professional and direct. "I can place recording devices in their shared residence tonight," he explained, "and I can put Thomas under surveillance immediately. If they're communicating regularly, we'll have evidence within days." I gave Harold the spare key to James and Sophie's condo that my son had provided for emergencies. "Do whatever's necessary, but it must be legal and admissible if needed in court." After Harold left, I discovered one more devastating piece of information through an urgent call from his associate. Sophie had been married before, not just engaged as we previously thought. A marriage in Miami 6 years ago, to an elderly investment banker that lasted just 9 months before his death. She had received a settlement from his estate and changed her name again afterward. This wasn't her first scam, it was an escalation of a pattern. I returned to my hotel room, but couldn't sleep. The weight of what I knew pressed on my chest like a stone. My son, my kind, brilliant boy, was hours away from marrying a woman who saw him only as an ATM with a convenient expiration date. A woman who was actively planning to devastate him emotionally and financially. Through the sleepless night, I formulated my plan. I would not ruin the wedding. Instead, I would let Sophie believe she had won, let her weave enough rope to hang herself, and then I would pull the trap shut when the time was right. My son would still be hurt, but he would be protected from the worst of the financial damage, and he would see Sophie's true nature beyond any possible doubt. As dawn broke over Boston Harbor, I watched the sunrise with a new resolve. Sophie had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she was conning a naive young man and his sentimental mother. She was about to discover that the old lady she dismissed was a mother protecting her child, and there is no more dangerous opponent in the world. At precisely 6 a.m., I arrived at Franklin Bennett's downtown office. Despite the early hour, he looked impeccable in a tailored suit, his white hair neatly combed. His assistant had prepared coffee and a light breakfast, though my stomach was too knotted to eat. "I've been thinking about this all night," Anna Franklin said after I settled in his office. "We need to create a convincing illusion of asset transfer while actually protecting everything." For the next hour, we crafted a detailed legal strategy. We created a set of fake inheritance documents that appeared to accelerate James's trust distribution to immediately after the wedding rather than on his 35th birthday. These documents suggested that $7.5 million would be transferred into a joint account with Sophie's name as co-beneficiary. In reality, we would be transferring a much smaller amount, approximately $200,000, into this monitored account. "This gives Sophie exactly what she wants to see," Franklin explained, without actually risking the bulk of the assets. "The real trust remains intact and protected." We also drafted a fake amendment to the family trust that appeared to name Sophie as a successor trustee alongside James. This would be especially enticing to someone planning to control and eventually abscond with family assets. What about the prenup? I asked. She's already signed it. The prenup remains valid and enforceable, Franklin assured me. Nothing in these fake documents contradicts or invalidates those protections. In fact, if she attempts to access funds improperly, she'll trigger several clauses that would leave her with nothing. Next, we called in Patricia Donovan, the family financial advisor who had worked with David for years. She quickly grasped the situation and agreed to be part of our plan. Patricia would attend the wedding reception and publicly discuss the accelerated inheritance with appropriate guests, ensuring word got back to Sophie. By 8 a.m., I had a complete dossier of fake documents carefully prepared to look authentic while containing subtle legal flaws that would render them unenforceable if Sophie ever tried to use them to claim assets. The real documents and protections remained safely in place. I left Franklin's office and called Harold for an update. "We've identified Thomas Reeves," he reported. Age 34, former real estate agent with a suspended license due to fraud allegations in California. He's been in Boston about 2 years. He's currently staying at the Harborview Hotel just 3 blocks from your son's wedding venue. "Perfect," I said. "Please continue monitoring him, but keep your distance. I don't want either of them suspicious today." My next call was to my closest friend, Margaret Palmer, who had been like a second mother to James since childhood. I gave her a condensed version of events and my plan. "Maggie, I need you to play a crucial role today. Can you be the one to bring up James's inheritance casually with Sophie during the reception? Mention how thrilled you are that David arranged for James to receive everything right after the wedding instead of waiting years. Anna, you know I'd do anything for you." And James, Margaret replied without hesitation. That gold-digging viper picked the wrong family to mess with. By 10 a.m., I had recruited several trusted friends and family members to help implement various aspects of my trap. Each would play a small part, creating a consistent illusion that Sophie was successfully integrating into a wealthy family with accessible assets. The most difficult part came next, returning to the hotel and pretending everything was normal. I had my hair and makeup done alongside Sophie's bridesmaids, smiling and making appropriate mother-of-the-groom small talk while inwardly seething at Sophie's performance as the blushing bride. "Anna, I'm so happy to officially become part of your family today," Sophie said, embracing me for the photographer's benefit. "James is the best thing that ever happened to me." It took every ounce of self-control not to confront her right there. Instead, I hugged her back and said, "We're so happy to welcome you, dear. I know David would have loved to be here to see James so happy." Sophie's eyes gleamed at the mention of my late husband, no doubt thinking of the fortune he had left behind that she planned to steal. "I wish I could have met him," she said, with practiced sincerity. While Sophie continued her preparations, I visited James in his suite. My son looked handsome in his tuxedo, his father's watch on his wrist, and his face alight with happiness. My heart ached, knowing what lay ahead. "You look beautiful, Mom," James said, kissing my cheek. "And you look just like your father on our wedding day," I replied, straightening his tie. "He would be so proud of the man you've become." "Do you think he would have liked Sophie, James?" asked, a rare moment of vulnerability showing through his confidence. The question pierced my heart. I couldn't lie to my son, but I couldn't ruin his wedding day either. "Your father always trusted your judgment," I said carefully. "He raised you to make good decisions." James smiled, satisfied with my answer. "I can't wait to start this next chapter, Mom. Sophie and I have so many plans." If only he knew the nature of his bride's actual plans. I excused myself, claiming I needed to check on some reception details, and found a quiet corner of the hotel garden. There alone among the roses David had always loved. I finally allowed myself a moment of grief for what should have been a genuinely joyous day. "I wish you were here, David," I whispered. "You always knew exactly what to do in a crisis." I imagined him beside me, his steady presence, a comfort even in memory. "I won't let her hurt our boy," I promised him and myself. "Not financially, and hopefully not his heart either if I can help it." Wiping away tears, I composed myself and returned to the pre-wedding activities. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. In just a few hours, my son would be married to a woman planning to destroy him. But while Sophie thought she was executing her perfect plan, she had no idea she was walking right into mine. The Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a floral wonderland. White roses and orchids cascaded from crystal chandeliers, and the afternoon sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests. Under normal circumstances, it would have been breathtaking. Today, it felt like an elaborate stage set for Sophie's performance. At precisely 4 p.m., the string quartet began playing Canon in D, and the procession started. I walked down the aisle and took my place in the front row, smiling appropriately for the photographers while scanning the room for Sophie's accomplice. Harold had confirmed Thomas was lurking near the hotel but hadn't entered the ceremony space. When Sophie appeared at the back of the ballroom, there were audible gasps. She was undeniably stunning in a form-fitting lace gown with a cathedral-length train. James's face lit up with love and pride as he watched her approach. For a moment, seeing my son's happiness, I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. But then I remembered Sophie's cold, calculating voice as she discussed discarding him once she had his money, and my resolve hardened. Throughout the ceremony, I maintained my composure, reciting responses when appropriate, and even managing to produce tears that guests would interpret as maternal joy. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, I applauded with everyone else, my hands feeling numb and disconnected from my body. During the cocktail hour, I circulated among guests, accepting congratulations, while keeping Sophie in my peripheral vision at all times. She played her part flawlessly, the devoted new bride, clinging to James's arm and charming his college friends and business associates. No one would suspect the viper beneath the beautiful facade. The reception began with dinner served on fine china at tables adorned with towering floral arrangements. James and Sophie sat at the head table, occasionally leaning toward each other, for kisses that made the guests coo appreciatively. I was seated nearby with Margaret and some longtime family friends who were all part of my plan. After the main course, it was time for speeches. As mother of the groom, I was expected to offer a toast. I approached the microphone, champagne glass in hand, heart pounding with the knowledge that my next words would set my trap in motion. When David and I married 40 years ago, I began. We had dreams of building something lasting together. A family, a home, a legacy. David succeeded beyond our wildest expectations, creating not just a thriving business, but a foundation for our family's future. I looked directly at Sophie as I continued. David always planned for James to inherit everything on his 35th birthday. But recently, as I reviewed the trust documents, I realized my husband had included a provision I'd forgotten. In the event of James's marriage, the inheritance schedule would accelerate, transferring immediately rather than waiting years. Sophie's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. This was news to her delicious bait she couldn't resist. So today I continued. I'm thrilled to announce that as of this morning, the primary trust distribution has been completed. James and Sophie, you begin your marriage not just with our blessing, but with the financial security David always intended for your future together. James looked surprised, but pleased. Sophie's expression was a masterpiece of controlled excitement. She knew better than to appear too interested in the money, but I could practically see the calculations running behind her eyes. To James and Sophie, I concluded, raising my glass. May your life together be blessed with the same love and prosperity David and I enjoyed. The guests applauded, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath the surface. As I returned to my seat, Margaret squeezed my hand in solidarity. During the cake cutting, Margaret executed her part of the plan, perfectly approaching Sophie while James was speaking with other guests. Such wonderful news about the inheritance, Margaret gushed. Anna told me it's nearly $8 million, and I understand your name is on the accounts as well. David was always so forward-thinking. Sophie maintained her composure, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. Yes, James and I are so blessed, she replied. Anna has been incredibly generous about sharing control of the family finances. Later, as the dancing began, I presented the couple with an envelope. A small wedding gift, I explained. Just some paperwork Franklin prepared confirming the trust changes. Nothing to worry about today, but I wanted you to have copies for your records. Sophie took the envelope with barely concealed eagerness, though she managed a convincing, "Thank you, Anna. This means so much to us." By midnight, when James and Sophie departed for their 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives, everything was in place. Sophie believed she had succeeded. The assets appeared to be transferred, her name was on the documents, and her timeline to divorce and disappear with millions was on track. What she didn't know was that Harold's team had installed legal monitoring equipment in their condo. Her communications with Thomas were being tracked, and the real family assets remained safely protected in trusts she couldn't touch. The weeks following the wedding unfolded exactly as I anticipated. Sophie and James returned from their honeymoon tanned and seemingly happy. James immediately threw himself back into work, while Sophie began the subtle transformation from adoring wife to increasingly dissatisfied spouse. Her first move was to suggest they move from their comfortable condo to a more lavish home in Beacon Hill. "We can certainly afford it now," she told James, "and we need space to grow into." When James hesitated, citing his preference for their current neighborhood, Sophie initiated their first major argument, questioning his willingness to live like a regular person when we have the means for so much more. I learned about these conflicts during my weekly dinners with James, who confided his confusion over Sophie's changing priorities. "She keeps talking about appearances and status," he said. "That never seemed important to her before." "Marriage can reveal new aspects of a person," I replied carefully. "Give it time." Meanwhile, Harold confirmed that Sophie was meeting Thomas at least twice weekly at her secret apartment. They were careful arriving separately and leaving at different times, but the pattern was consistent. Audio surveillance captured them discussing the inheritance and their plans to access the full amount. "The old bat actually did it," Sophie was recorded saying, "7.5 million, just like that. And she made me a co-trustee. Can you believe it? In a year, we can move everything offshore through the shell companies we set up." As the months passed, Sophie became progressively careless. Believing she had successfully infiltrated our family and secured the inheritance, she grew bolder in her true behaviors. She began spending extravagantly, explaining to James that they should enjoy their wealth. She pushed him to reduce contact with me, further claiming I was too involved in their finances. Most tellingly, she abruptly changed her stance on children. Before the wedding, she had enthusiastically discussed having children right away. Now she suggested waiting at least 5 years before starting a family. This timeline not coincidentally aligned with her plan to divorce James after securing his assets. 4 months after the wedding, James called me clearly upset. "Mom, something's wrong with Sophie. She's not the same person I married. She's cold, constantly criticizing me and obsessed with money. Last night, she suggested I step back from my research project because it's not lucrative enough compared to corporate consulting." "Have you talked to her about these concerns?" I asked, knowing full well the source of the changes but needing to maintain my role in this painful drama. "I've tried, but she dismisses me or turns it around to blame my work schedule or my relationship with you." His voice cracked slightly. "I feel like I'm losing her, Mom, and I don't understand why." It took everything in me not to tell him the truth, then and there. But our plan required patience. We needed Sophie to make the first official move toward divorce to fully expose her intentions. 6 months into the marriage, that moment finally arrived. James called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice hollow with shock. "Sophie asked for a divorce today," he said. "She claims we've grown apart and want different things." "Mom, I don't understand. I thought we were working through our issues." "I'm so sorry, James." I said, my heart breaking for his pain, even as I felt vindication. "Would you like me to come over?" "No, she's not here. She said she's staying with a friend tonight to give me space." "Can I come to you instead?" "Of course," I replied. "And James, bring any paperwork she may have given you." When James arrived, he looked like he had aged years in hours. He handed me a document. She already had divorce papers drafted. "She's asking for half of everything, including my inheritance." I scanned the papers, noting they had been prepared by a law firm known for aggressive tactics in high-asset divorces. James, I need to tell you something important, and it's going to be difficult to hear. The time had come to spring the trap, not just to protect our family's assets, but to save my son from years of manipulation by a woman who never loved him at all. I sat James down in David's study, the room where my late husband had made all his important decisions. The familiar surroundings seemed to comfort my son as he slumped in the leather chair, the divorce papers clutched in his hand. Before I explain everything, I began gently. I need you to know that what I did was out of love for you. I wanted to protect you, not just financially, but emotionally as well. James looked up, confusion clouding his eyes. What are you talking about, Mom? I took a deep breath. The night before your wedding, I overheard Sophie on the phone in her hotel suite. She was talking to someone named Thomas, discussing her plan to marry you, wait for your inheritance to transfer, and then divorce you and take half the money. James stared at me in disbelief. That's impossible. Sophie wouldn't. She couldn't. I wish that were true, I said. But after hearing her conversation, I hired a private investigator who confirmed everything. Sophie has been planning this con from the beginning, James. She targeted you specifically because of your inheritance. My son shook his head vehemently. No. There must be some misunderstanding. Sophie loves me. We've had problems recently, but all couples do. Rather than argue, I reached for the folder I had prepared. I have evidence, James. Recorded conversations between Sophie and her partner Thomas Reeves. Financial records showing her previous marriage to an elderly man who died under questionable circumstances. Documentation of her multiple name changes and identity shifts. As I laid out the evidence piece by piece, James's expression shifted from denial to confusion to dawning horror. When I played the audio recording of Sophie discussing their divorce plans with Thomas just last week, the color drained from his face. 7 months of marriage should be enough, Sophie's voice said clearly. We've established the pattern of marital discord the lawyers said we needed. Once we file, we can push for a quick settlement. He'll want to avoid embarrassment, especially with his company considering that public offering. What about the prenup? Thomas asked on the recording. It's strong, but there are workarounds. The inheritance is already in accounts with my name on them. The lawyers think we can get at least half, maybe more, with the right judge. I stopped the recording as James put his head in his hands. I'm so sorry, son. I wanted to tell you before the wedding, but I had no proof then, just what I'd overheard. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. Why didn't you tell me once you had proof? He asked, his voice raw with pain. Because by then, you were already married. I needed to protect the family assets while gathering enough evidence to ensure Sophie couldn't dispute the truth. I reached for his hand. And I'll be honest, I also wanted her to reveal her true nature to you directly so there would be no doubt in your mind. James was silent for a long moment, processing everything he'd heard. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red but clear. The inheritance she thinks she's getting. It's not real, is it? I smiled sadly at my brilliant son. No. After I overheard her plans, I worked with Franklin to create a convincing illusion. The accounts she has access to contain only a small fraction of the actual inheritance. The bulk of the assets remain protected in the original trusts, which she cannot touch. A flicker of relief crossed James's face, quickly replaced by renewed pain. She never loved me. It was all a lie. Every moment, every word. His voice broke. I believe she targeted you for money, yes, I said gently. But James, no one could spend time with you and not see what a remarkable man you are. That's the true loss here, Sophie's inability to recognize the real treasure in front of her. We sat in silence as James absorbed the devastating truth. After several minutes, he straightened his shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart ached. What do we do now? He asked. That depends on what you want, I replied. We have options. After discussion, we decided to confront Sophie directly with Franklin and Harold present. James insisted on facing her himself rather than leaving it to the lawyers. I need to look her in the eyes when she admits the truth, he said. I called Sophie and asked her to come to my house the following morning for an important family discussion. She arrived precisely at 10, dressed impeccably in a designer suit that had no doubt been purchased with James's money. Her expression of concern for James seemed genuine until she saw Franklin and Harold sitting in the living room. "What's this about?" she asked, wariness replacing the fake sympathy. James stood by the fireplace, his face composed despite the pain I knew he was feeling. "Please sit down, Sophie. We need to talk about your divorce filing." Sophie smoothed her skirt as she. "Saturday. I know this is difficult, James, but sometimes marriages don't work out. I think a clean break is best for both of us." "A clean break," James repeated. "Is that what you and Thomas call it?" Sophie's carefully composed expression faltered for just a second. "I don't know what you're talking about." James nodded to Harold, who played one of the recordings. Sophie's own voice filled the room discussing how to maximize her financial gain from the divorce. As the recording continued, Sophie's face went through a remarkable transformation from shocked to calculating to coldly angry. When the recording ended, James spoke quietly. "Was any of it real, Sophie? Did you ever love me at all?" Sophie's mask fell away completely. "Don't be pathetic, James. Men like you are all the same, thinking your money makes you special. You're boring, predictable, and completely oblivious. Of course I never loved you." The cruelty of her words made me flinch, but James remained steady. "Thank you for your honesty, finally. You should know that the inheritance you've been planning to steal doesn't exist. At least, not in the form you think." Franklin stepped forward, explaining the legal deception we had created. "The documents you received were expertly crafted fakes, Mrs. Williams. The accounts you have access to contain only $200,000, not $7.5 million. The bulk of the assets remain in the original trusts, which have now been amended to exclude you entirely." Sophie's face contorted with rage. "You can't do that. I have documentation. I'll sue you all for fraud." Actually, Franklin continued calmly, attempting to use those documents would constitute fraud on your part, as would your conspiracy with Mr. Reeves to defraud the Williams family. We have more than enough evidence for criminal charges, should we choose to pursue them. Before Sophie could respond, the doorbell rang. Harold answered it, returning with none other than Thomas Reeves. "I apologize for the intrusion," Harold said. "But Mr. Reeves was quite insistent on seeing Sophie after receiving our evidence package this morning." Thomas looked as furious as Sophie. "You said this was foolproof," he shouted at her. "Now I've got private investigators sending evidence to my employer and threatening criminal charges." Sophie jumped to her feet. "Shut up, you idiot, don't say another word." But Thomas was beyond caution. "I never wanted to target someone so high profile. This was your idea, just like Miami and Seattle. Now we're both exposed." As Sophie and Thomas turned on each other, revealing more details of their previous schemes and confirming everything we already knew, James watched with a strange calm. When he finally spoke, both conspirators fell silent. "Here's what's going to happen," James said, his voice steady. "Sophie, you will sign these divorce papers my attorney has prepared. They specify that you leave this marriage with nothing except your personal belongings and the clothes you brought into it. No alimony, no property division, no claims on any assets whatsoever." Sophie laughed bitterly. "Why would I agree to that?" "Because the alternative is that we provide all this evidence to the district attorney's office," I interjected. "Harold has already spoken with them informally. They're quite interested in your pattern of targeting wealthy men." The color drained from Sophie's face. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," James said. "But are you willing to risk prison to find out? Sign the papers, Sophie. Walk away now and we won't pursue charges. Stay and fight. And we'll use every resource at our disposal to ensure you face the full consequences of your actions." For a moment, I saw calculation in Sophie's eyes as she weighed her options. Then, with a coldness that confirmed we had made the right decision, she picked up the pen Franklin offered. "Fine. You win this round." She scrawled her signature on the documents. "But remember this moment, James. You're nothing without your mother and your family money. At least I had the skills to nearly take it from you." James didn't respond to her taunts. Once the papers were signed, Harold escorted both Sophie and Thomas out, informing them that security would accompany them to collect Sophie's belongings from the condo. They would be monitored until they left Boston, a condition Sophie accepted with seething resentment. When the door closed behind them, James sank onto the sofa, the composure he had maintained during the confrontation finally crumbling. 7 months of my life, he whispered. All a lie. I sat beside him and took his hand. Not all of it. You showed tremendous strength, integrity, and dignity throughout this ordeal. I've never been prouder of you. As Franklin tactfully excused himself to file the divorce papers, I held my son while he finally allowed himself to grieve for the love he thought he had found, and the future he had imagined. The trap had sprung perfectly, protecting our family assets and exposing Sophie's true nature, but the emotional cost had been high. Now would begin the harder work of healing James's wounded heart. The days following Sophie's departure were dark ones for James. He moved temporarily into his old room at my house, unable to face the condo filled with memories and shared possessions. Each morning I would find him in David's study, often having spent the night there surrounded by his father's books and photographs. I keep wondering if Dad would be disappointed in me, James confessed one evening, for being so easily fooled. Your father would never be disappointed in your capacity to love and trust, I assured him. Those are qualities he valued above all others. He would be proud of how you handled yourself when the truth came out. The divorce was finalized with remarkable speed given Sophie's eagerness to avoid criminal charges. She and Thomas left Boston, though Harold maintained discreet monitoring to ensure they didn't target anyone else in our social circle. The last we heard, they had moved to Chicago, presumably to find new victims. James initially threw himself into work with an intensity that worried me. He stayed at his lab until midnight most days, developing new sustainable energy technology that had the potential to transform his field. While I admired his professional focus, I worried about his withdrawal from social connections. You can't hide in your work forever, I told him gently after 2 months of this routine. Healing requires reconnection, not just distraction. I don't trust my judgment anymore, Mom, he admitted. I was completely blindsided by Sophie. How can I ever trust anyone again? Sophie was a professional con artist with a documented history of deception, I reminded him. This wasn't a normal relationship that went wrong. And while being cautious is natural, after betrayal, building walls around your heart punishes you more than it protects you. Gradually, James began to re-engage with life. He joined a support group for victims of relationship fraud, finding comfort in sharing experiences with others who had been similarly deceived. He reconnected with old friends Sophie had isolated him from, many of whom welcomed him back without judgment. 6 months after the divorce, James decided to sell the condo and buy a simple house near the Charles River. I need a fresh start, he explained. Somewhere without memories of Sophie. As he settled into his new home, I noticed subtle signs of healing. He laughed more easily. He spoke about Sophie without the raw pain that had initially characterized any mention of her name. He began having dinner once a week with friends rather than working every evening. Franklin and I also made changes to the family trust structure with James's full involvement this time. I want to understand everything, my son insisted. No more financial blind spots. We created a more transparent system for managing the family assets, with James taking an active role in investment decisions. David would have approved of this evolution, always having intended for James to eventually manage his inheritance with confidence and wisdom. On the 1-year anniversary of the divorce, James invited me to dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. He looked more like himself than he had in a long time, the shadows gone from his eyes. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said as we enjoyed our meal. About Sophie, about what happened, and about what I've learned. And what have you learned? I asked. That trust isn't naive when it's given appropriately, he said thoughtfully. Sophie exploited my trust because she was deliberately manipulating me. But withholding trust from everyone because of one person's deception would mean she wins twice, taking both my money and my capacity for connection. I smiled, hearing echoes of David's wisdom in our son's words. Your father used to say something similar. He believed vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness, when shared with the right people. James nodded. I'm also grateful in a strange way. Not for the deception, but for what it revealed. About myself, about you, about what really matters in life. And what matters? I asked. Authenticity, he replied without hesitation. Sophie was a reflection of what she thought I wanted to see. There was nothing real there. What I value now is genuine connection, even when it's messy or imperfect. Over dessert, James mentioned that he had reconnected with Eliza Bennett Franklin's daughter, whom he had known since childhood. "We've been having coffee weekly, just as friends," he explained, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "She's finishing her doctorate in environmental policy. She actually understands my research, which is refreshing." I remembered Eliza fondly, a serious, kind young woman who had always had a soft spot for James when they were younger. "That sounds lovely," I said, carefully neutral, though my heart lifted at this sign of James opening himself to possibilities again. In the following months, James and Eliza's friendship blossomed into something deeper. Unlike his whirlwind romance with Sophie, this relationship developed slowly, built on a foundation of shared history and genuine compatibility. When they eventually began dating officially, I noticed the difference immediately. There was no performance, no calculated charm, just two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. 2 years after the disastrous end of his first marriage, James and I established the Williams Innovation Fund, a grant program for young engineers working on sustainable technology solutions. The foundation became our shared project, a way to honor David's legacy while creating something positive from the painful experience with Sophie. "Money can be a weapon or a tool," James told me as we reviewed grant applications one evening. "Sophie saw it only as something to acquire and possess. Dad understood it was most valuable when used to create opportunity for others." At the fund's inaugural ceremony, James gave a speech that brought tears to my eyes. "My father built a legacy based on innovation and integrity," he said to the assembled guests. "He believed wealth carried responsibility, not privilege. While I learned that lesson the hard way, I'm grateful for the wisdom it brought me." Watching my son that night, confident and purposeful, I felt a profound sense of peace. Sophie had intended to destroy James financially and emotionally, but instead her deception had ultimately led to his growth. He was stronger, wiser, and more authentic than before. Later that evening, as James and Eliza chatted with grant recipients, I stepped onto the balcony for a moment alone. Looking up at the stars, I felt David's presence, as I often did in quiet moments. "We did it, David," I whispered. "We protected him not just from financial loss, but from losing himself in bitterness. He's going to be okay." The true inheritance we pass to our children isn't money or property, but values, resilience, and the capacity to learn from life's hardest lessons. Sophie had targeted our family for what she perceived as easy money, never understanding that the real wealth was something she couldn't steal, the bond between us that grew stronger through adversity. What would you have done if you had overheard such a devastating confession before your child's wedding? Would you have revealed the truth immediately, or set a trap like I did? I hope my story offers some comfort to anyone who has experienced betrayal or deception. Remember that healing is possible, and sometimes the most painful experiences lead to unexpected wisdom. Thank you for watching, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Your support means the world to me, and I'll be back next week with another story from my journey through life's most challenging moments.